Oh, okay.
More and more in the world, as we live in it, when somebody brings up Christianity, it's not just even in a helpful or curious way. Can be kind of downright mean. We'll learn that in history that's not all that rare, that being the case. There's all kinds of Nelsons out there, ha-ha, going on. And we Christians sometimes have, at least mentally inside, if not even in our reaction, tend to head into the bushes. So back into the bushes, don't want to get involved, don't want to get into this. And a lot of times it's a good thing, because especially on social media, it can be just a waste of time. Paul warns us. He says, don't waste your time with meaningless words and arguments. However, on the other side is the thing that we are called to have a reason for the faith we have. So we're going to balance these two things out. Since I'm picking on social media a bit, let me just show you something else that came up, basically a clever jab at Christianity in a way. And so I came across something that was like this. There's your religion. And there's 44,892 religions in the world, and just by coincidence, yours happens to be right. Well, I don't know about you, but my first response when I see a challenge like that, I kind of want to back into the bushes. Okay, whatever. But I am called to have a reasonable faith, and a reason for my faith, and a reason for challenges that might be brought. Not that I have to go and get in someone's face, but at least for myself even, I should have an answer to challenges. Not a quick remark, not clever, but something based on my understanding. That's where we're going. That's what we'll find out this word apologetics really means, what it gets into. So if we just, for example, take this little one, since it's something that happened, this little clever witticism, and say, well, really, is it really saying is something as reasonable as I think? Am I really as silly as I think I am, or feeling for somebody pointing out this? Because, of course, they have a point. One religion out of so many. How can you say it's right? That argument's out there. But let's just take the argument apart, not for the sake of winning an argument, but just to see the dynamics of how challenges to our faith might come. Now, there's all these dots, and it's assuming something. It's assuming that every religion is equal. Now, I'm sorry, but that's really not true. If we start determining the quality and the intensity and the depth of religions, they're not all equal. Everything in there, if you're going to talk about 44,000 religions, some of them are little more than some witch doctor somewhere on an island somewhere. So they're not all equal in that sense. So the assessment has a problem. Let's just say, well, let's just base it on human impact. Let's say one thing to look at is how much of the world has been affected by this type of thinking of God or the divine. And if we do that, what we find out from all these 44,000 plus religions is it really starts breaking us down to about 4. Did you catch that when Petula Myers was mentioning on her missions video? She did mention how she walked by all 4 buildings of major religions. There's not that many. So as far as impact on the world, really on that basis alone, we're not all equal dots. There's a breakdown even in that sense. So you know what? Maybe it's not so silly that my religion just might be right, that I might actually be on the right track. But let's use another angle and another perspective to try and gauge this. Let's say, well, let's look at the history of the religions. How did they spread? What kind of a message that was godlike coming from them? And if we do that, it's an interesting thing. If you want to talk global religions, there's really only two in the world that are really global focused. If we looked at a lot of the other ones, they would deal with shamanism or something that dealt with some little area, and they're not interested in the rest of the world. They're just trying to make sense of their own little piece of the pie. Other religions are very exclusive. But there are two. Now we've pared down from our 44,000 down to just two religions. And if we consider the two most impacting globally religions, what they are, the one that is number 2 up there, well, basically it started with one man and then very quickly divided violently into two main factions. And then from those main factions went into most of the rest of the world, and how they spread was not by the presenting of a gospel, but by military conquest. You will believe what I believe. And if you don't, here's my sword. And that is the way it's supported that way from its own teachings. If you're wondering what religion I'm talking about, I won't say go to the prayer pages. Just follow the global prayer concerns, and I think you'll figure out what I'm talking about. And even though it depends on oppression or external forces to cause one to believe, it still is only the second largest religion in the world. The one that's got a hold of me that for some reason I think is right is actually the largest at 2.2 billion people. How did these 2.2 billion get in there? Well, we can start with this. When it started to form, in fact, opposite from the sword, you cannot be a Christian without a wholehearted, voluntary commitment. How do you find God? You search for Him with your whole heart and mind and soul. You have to give everything to follow this God. And even as hard a sell as that would be, somehow the other religion took 10,000 years to gain its 21%. This religion actually was all over Europe within 200 years of its inception. Maybe there's something a little more behind it than we think. And to qualify, has there ever been violence associated with Christianity too? But even that's interesting. If you look at the greatest dark times, if you want to say, of the Christian religion or history, the time of the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition, in both these times, it wasn't a case of evangelism, of spreading the word. It was actually panic and fear to try and purge the religion itself and to try and purify it man's way. What was done there cannot be qualified by Scripture. It was actually in contrast to it. But even that's to history. Let's go to where it really meets the road, where the rubber really meets the road, is in the quality of doctrine, in what it actually teaches. Are all the dots equal there? Well, wow, if we look at them, we find one is really, most of those dots would probably deal with something that the rest of the world would say is just superstition. It's hard to see it in any other way. If my religion depends on me eating magic mushrooms, that's fun, but I'm not sure how much truth is there, or peyote or whatever. However, in contrast, in the Christian doctrine has evolved through hundreds of writers in thousands of years, through 66 books as we now have it, and all of it somehow is clear-headed and doesn't conflict with itself. It gives very solid answers that are counterintuitive to human nature. Where we might want to hate, it says we're called to love. Where we might push people away, it says no, we accept them. It doesn't sound like the way we tend to think naturally. So even in the doctrine, no, all the dots are not equal. And all of a sudden, you sit back with an apologetic. And that doesn't mean you're apologizing. We'll find out what that means in a minute. You find out maybe it is not so silly to think just maybe one of those dots is right. Maybe the dot you're in isn't so wrong after all. Now, this brings us to what we're talking about. We already said we're into this new series with the book or without it. As we follow along, here it is, session 1 for the rest of this week. Next Sunday, starting session 2 with the different topics. Really, what we're involved with this morning is, why are we talking about this at all? Why don't we just be like Homer and head back into the bushes? It's comfortable back there. Well, we're going to look at that. The name of the series was Everyday Questions. Life's biggest questions are being asked all around you. Are you hearing the questions? Beautiful thing. If you know anything of Ravi Zacharias, speaks all over the world. Excuse me. He deals with all other religions. He looks at the whole thing and respectfully compares things. And in this, his insight from all that he's gone through in life has been, you know what, even the person who's making the clever dot thing is asking a question. Is there any God at all? Or is there a way? There is a question, even in the hostile remarks, there are questions. Do we hear the questions? And do we have answers for them? Now, the whole study, the whole campaign, the whole journey that we're going to take over essentially the next 9 Sundays, give or take a few breaks along the way, is based on, starts with one line, one sentence, and it's spoken by Peter, 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. Always be ready. Always be ready. For what? To give a defense. To who? To everyone who asks you. Ask me what? A reason for the hope that is in you. A defense for the reason of the hope that is in you. Now, that's assuming we have hope within us, and then you know what we do with that. In the Christ follower, Paul put it this way in talking to Timothy. His language is even a little stronger. I charge you. In other words, I challenge you, I command you, however you want to look at it. Therefore, before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who will judge the living and the dead at the appearing of his kingdom, preach the word. Now, preach doesn't necessarily mean doing what I'm doing right now. Preaching can be in actions and conversations. It can be in many ways. Preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Not just when somebody thinks you're cool, when somebody thinks you're uncool for following Christ. Convince, rebuke, exhort, and with all long-suffering and teaching. So here we are. We're looking for a reason for the hope. We're talking about defense. We're talking about being ready at all times. But when it's fashionable, when it's not fashionable, having this. Let me give it in a kind of a practical way. If somebody came in here, had no idea what this church was all about, and they just happened to walk up to you and say, why are you here today? What do you hope to gain from being in this place today? Would you have an answer? Would it be a reasonable answer? Would it be a balanced answer? Would it actually reflect a balanced view of Scripture? 3 objectives to starting us off. The first one just is investigating. We're already talking about it. Why do we bother with this at all, this particular topic? 2, explore the background of that verse. Interesting verse, Peter says, telling you to have a defense and have a reason. It all makes sense. But where's he coming from? What was going on when he said that? And when we understand the background, we'll understand more deeply what we're told to do. And then the third thing is simply look a little deeper into the how. Don't expect somebody came up and said, well, then are you going to give the answer to the questions today, how and why and all this? No, I'm not. If I could stand up here and say, come back tonight and I'll tell you everything you need to know. I don't know what I'm talking, but it's not Christianity. No, we're just going to get started in a direction. The challenge is far bigger than that. So why are we talking? Let me tell you how this hit me when I first started contemplating on this whole thing. Personal anecdote. someone in the church, many years back now, actually, this was a memory that I'm sharing with you, by the way, that's what I'm talking, is this person came, they had been traveling the week before for their work. They were on an airplane. And on that airplane, where they were sitting across the aisle from them, a man and woman didn't know each other, just strangers, and they were striking up a conversation, as that happens sometimes. But it was a very rare conversation for our day. Very seldom now does anybody just ask you frankly and with an open attitude, why do you believe what you believe? We don't tend to get that question anymore. And it's so rare that if someone does ask you, we very quickly turn into Homer Simpson and start, okay, and we back into the bushes so we don't have to answer. But this lady was asked by this man, and so our friend here, a Canaan person, couldn't help it. I would have been eavesdropping on, let's see how she handles this one. So as it went on, the lady, as she shared why she believed God exists and why a relationship, really came down to, because I feel him in my heart. I sense him, he's there, and it was a subjective answer. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a good answer to start with. You know what? If you have no personal relationship, if there's no first-hand information, you don't have anything to share yet. You can, but you don't yet. The great place to start, but that's where the conversation started and ended, really. Her argument for her reason for her faith started and ended there. The man wasn't particularly moved by it, and quite frankly, neither was our Canaan friend, as they said, is that all we have to offer? If somebody were to, is that all we have to offer on why we believe in what we believe? And even more important, I'd extend this question a little bit, and I'd say, is that all God expects for you to offer? Is that all God expects from us? Should we have something more? And the answer is, in this case, I'll give you a straight answer, is yes, God expects more. In fact, he commands it. He says you are to have a reason for the hope that is within you. Two words that we borrow from the Greek, and you don't have to memorize the words, but we need the concepts. It's just the flavor of the Greek words come out different. Is that Greeks were all about debating, and this plays an important part. Probably the first high school debate was back in some Greek high school. That's my feeling on this. And there are two words that are very important to the Greek. The words would be logos and apologia. And you probably gather that. I said I'd explain apologetics in a moment. Now, here's how this works. A logos is the core of your thinking. It could be, in the Greek, it could be on anything. I could say with Rick, I said, I think it's going to be sunny this afternoon, and Rick could say, no, it's going to rain. And then he could say, well, tell me your logos. Tell me, what's the reason, what in the core of your thinking possibly you think is going to be sunny? And I could ask the same of him. Logos is at the core of it. Now, logos becomes more profound for the Christian because it comes to mean God himself. But think of it this way first. Logos is the core of why you believe what you believe. And so if you are going to explain your faith, there better be some hard thinking behind it. For us, it kind of works like this. If we take this in context, Peter talked about a hope. Well, our hope that we have is in Jesus Christ, and we believe that Jesus Christ has this perfect plan that is unfolding in the world. He's always in control. We're involved in the plan. Not only that, we have this wild, crazy belief that somehow an infinite God exists in my finite little self. I actually have God in me. The hope that is not just hope, but within me. You know what? If I believe something that wild, I better have some good reasons. And the Bible itself says, you and I better have some good reasons. We better have a logos, a line of reasoning for why we believe what we believe. Logos becomes very important. Have a reason for what you believe in all of this. And it's going to, of course, it's like that lady. It's going to start firsthand. is that, well, first there is that sense, but it goes beyond simply a sense of God within me. And then it moves into another thing, the second word. But just to stay with logos for a second, the idea of understanding. First you have a first-hand experience, but then you need to understand the first-hand experience that you have. So you have a logos. Barclay puts it this way: the Christian must go through the mental and spiritual toil of thinking out his faith. Must go through the mental and spiritual toil of thinking out his faith so that he can tell what he believes and why. What he believes and why. Why is this so important with this knowing what we believe? Well, first thing is because God tells you. He tells you. Well, why does God tell me? Why is this so important, God? It starts with you even. It doesn't even start with anyone else. Just start with you. You have to explain your faith to yourself. At some point, especially in times when it gets really tough, you better have some kind of an answer for yourself on why you believe what you believe, or you're on pretty thin ice. Then it becomes a question of, you're not just told to believe for you. Your faith, in effect, ultimately, is not even for your own benefit. It is for the benefit of others. For God so loved the world. Not you, not just me or you, the world. So I need to be able to explain reasons for my faith. I better have something to share. And this may be in some very tough situations. This may be in a case of ridicule. This may be in another situation going on here, but I better be able to articulate what I have to share. I was sharing in the first class another vignette of social media once again. We had put on something, Kathy and I at one time, that was a counter argument to something a big celebrity scientist put on. And boy, did it get pasted. It just get blasted. And it was just comments and comments and comments that came in on this thing. And we were answering them in as respectful a way as possible. And I really learned a lesson. And one response in there was from some young lady who said, you know, really basically not too moved on the video, but she was moved by the responses. So, a reason. This brings us into what Peter was in the background. I want to get to what Peter is talking about here. Why did Peter write what he wrote? What was he saying here? And he was saying, first of all, the reason for your faith, the logos for your faith. But it wasn't just enough to have evidence. You needed to be able to articulate it. And that brings in the second word, apologia, which means defense, as like a legal term. You go to court, you need to defend yourself, defend your position. Apologia, that's where the word apologetics comes from, is being able to articulate in a reasonable fashion what you believe. You don't only have to believe and have reasons, you need to be able to communicate them in some kind of a firm way. Here's the background. You know, any verse, you never do this. Never just take one verse and then build a whole line of thinking. What's going on in that verse? Who's speaking? Who are they speaking to? What's the context? 1 Peter 3, I'm going to back us up to 13, and it starts like this. And who is he who will harm you if you become followers of what is good? So this whole thing about sharing your faith starts with people trying to hurt you. Wow, okay. So that sets a new flavor, doesn't it? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. And do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts. And then ending with, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks for the reason of the hope within you. The background is this. He's writing this. Peter is in Rome, probably, somewhere around 62 AD. What do we know about that time? Well, one thing we know is Nero is in power. And just to give you a snapshot of how Nero thought, it was popular, it was out of fashion to be a Christian. So if you were indicted as a Christian, you might have the honor of coming to one of his garden parties. As a torch. Yes. You would be pitched in tar, impaled on a stake, and it'll be a living torch at one of his garden parties. So when Peter says, be ready to give a defense as if your life is depending on it, it's because it was. It was a serious business to be able to give an apologia. That is a firm, concise argument for the things that you believe, or explanation of the things you believe. 62 AD, throw out another word for you, diaspora. And this word simply means in Jerusalem, when Christianity first started, everything was just hunky-dory for about 2 weeks. And then we have Stephen getting stoned. And then, and I don't mean in a nice way either. I'm talking about with big heavy rocks. And then a persecution broke out, and it became so severe that all the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem had to scatter everywhere to the wind. So here we are, Rome being the epicenter of all of this. So here we have Peter in one of the worst places where they're burning people, writing this thing about defense to people persecuted all over the Christian world, or not the Christian world, the world where Christians lived, telling them, in this situation, you better be ready to have a reasonable explanation for the reasons of the hope that exists within you. It becomes a pretty serious involvement going on here. Kind of implies a few things, these two words, doesn't it? One is, if you are going to be, hold on to a line of thinking, a line of faith so firmly that you are willing to be a torch at Nero's garden party, if you're willing to die for what you believe, you probably do and better have very firm reasons for why you refuse to not follow what you're following. You better have serious reasons for following it. So the idea of logos, the reasons articulated in an apologia, becomes really important. These two words become extremely important. If we understand, this is the background from where this term is telling you, you better be ready, always be ready with a defense for the reason of your hope. Always be ready. You better know what you believe, and you better know why. Well, let's just touch on the why a little bit. The why is for the sake of divinity. What do I mean? You better know what and why you believe for the sake of God. Why? Well, how about this? We believe we are following a perfect God who makes perfect plans. And the perfect plan, based in perfect love, said that he himself had to die so that you and I might have a chance at life, that we might have eternal life. It was well thought out. As a matter of fact, this plan was before creation. It was a well thought out plan. Do you think we owe God a little bit of mental effort if we're going to accept his plan? Do we not, for the sake of God, should we not be able to articulate this phenomenal thing in some way? Should we not be able to do that? If we can't, do you think we might just be doing God an offensive injustice for the sake of God? Second reason, for the sake of ourselves, as I already mentioned. If it hasn't, I tell you it will. Somewhere along the lines in life, you are going to get a proverbial kick in the head. And to the point where you may step back and go, why do I even believe in God at all? And if you don't have reasons, not just your own makeup, but through your understanding of God's teaching, if you don't have reasons, chances are there is a point you will fall away right there. Apostate. So we need these just for ourselves. As I said, though, it's not just for ourselves, it's for others. But just for ourselves, let me share a little scenario, because I've come to a conclusion on something. I thought it's a theory worth sharing, and that you may agree or disagree. I've come to this conclusion that everyone who walks away from their faith, the only way you'll ever lose it, walking away deliberately, intentionally, and with all resolution, is because of this one fact, ultimately. Is that the age or the maturity of a person's understanding does not match the age of their life, physically, where they're living. Here's kind of what I'm getting at. You start out, you're brought up by Christian parents, let's just say in this scenario. And at 6 years old, it's explained to you, you've come to an understanding in yourself of questions, maybe big ones, like, why is there suffering in the world? Why did God let my cat die? Why is there death and suffering? And between your parents and you struggling with it as a 6-year-old, you come up with an answer that works for you at 6. But let's say now you grow, you're not 6 anymore, you're 16. You've gone through that shooting in Florida, in your high school. Wow. Why does God allow death? Oh, wow, man, that's a bigger question now, isn't it? But what if in your understanding, in your faith, you are still at the 5-year-old level? What if somewhere like you never grew in your understanding and you try and answer your 16-year-old question with a 6-year-old understanding? Take something like this. John tells us God is love. Just take the word love. At 6, what does love mean to you? Love means that Grandpa gave me that cookie Mom wouldn't let me have, so Grandpa loves me. So it's a pretty simple explanation. But what happens when you become the father of the 6-year-old? Love's a whole other thing now, isn't it? Sometimes it's tough love, sometimes it's hard. And that's just, at 25 or 26. How about love when you're 36 and 46, 76, 86? It becomes something more, doesn't it? Well, if you need to expand your understanding, if God is love, then how about that? Do I understand God as a 6-year-old? Is that where it stopped? Do I understand Him? I'm in my 40s and I understand Him like I did when I was 16. No wonder I walk away. I've never developed my logos. And I don't have any apologia anymore because I haven't grown in my understanding at all. If I'm going to understand God as love, it's going to change a lot through the ages, isn't it? So I need to understand for the sake of myself. Now, for the sake of others as well, we live in a culture that tells us, here's the thing. You don't have to worry so much about the lies, as a Christian anyway. You know what you have to worry about? The half-truths. Because I've found this with almost anything that's kind of a hostile thing put out and causes you to become Homer Simpson and back into the bushes, is that it's going to catch you with the half-truth. And if you can't examine and isolate the part that's true from the lie, you're going to end up in trouble. Your logos will give you the reasoning, but your apologia understands. It can discern where this stuff is coming from. We got to learn. We have to be deep enough to discern the half-truths. That's where some of the worst... And then to be able to share even with others. If you're trapped, is my discernment enough? I can help you out. Can I give something to you that will help you from your situation? And in this whole argument then becomes this hard part. Once we understand, then it goes almost counterintuitive as we look at how we are supposed to share. If we keep reading, remember Peter's dealing with some very hostile people, some very obnoxious people. I think it's rude. If somebody burns you at the stake, I think it's rude. It's just not nice. So you're dealing with some hard people, worse than even on the internet. But Peter ends with the idea, this is how you do. Once you have a logos, once you have an apologia, when you share with others, share with meekness and fear. And those words might be humility and respect. There's different words in translations, but they come to the same thing. To share in a meek, a humble, a fearful or respectful way, and in good conscience. To share in this way. I wonder why I put that in. Well, here's one thing with human nature. Is even when we understand something, just think of something you understand very well. So, put religion aside, something you understand very well. Maybe it's fixing cars, Maybe it's how to get along with women. Maybe it's how to get along with men. It could be anything. This is probably for us who have been married for a while. You ever been there? And then somebody who's young and married comes and says, well, I did this, and I told my wife this, and you cringe and you go, ah, why did you ever say something like that? When we understand something really well, we tend to look at people who don't understand and go, boy, are you stupid. We already did it. Boy, are you stupid. Let me tell you. And in our Christianity, if we've reached a point in our relationship in this profound area where there really is a God, and He really does love, and there really is a way to be in a living relationship with Him, and somebody comes up and tells you, boy, oh, you don't understand anything, and you just want to go, man, are you stupid? But we can't. It's not the way it is done. It is done in humility. It is done in respect. It is done in fear of God, and in fear in the way of that it is a respectful thing. I love the way the Living Bible translates 1 Peter 3:15. It says, quietly trust yourself to Christ, your Lord, and if anybody asks why you believe as you do, be ready to tell him and do it in a gentle and respectful way. The thing to ask, I guess, ourselves, here's one thing. Yes, one thing is going to be, if the Spirit of God's working within you, that Spirit makes us humble. We realize, you know what? There was a time I didn't understand. I am just as dead in my sins or was as this person is. So there's a humility that's built into it. But there's also in the motive. When you share something with someone, are you doing it for your sake or their sake? What do I mean by that? Well, if it's for my sake, and I'm talking to someone, at least for a minute, it would feel good to say, boy, are you stupid. And then hammer them over the head with my Bible and say, boy, I taught them. Boy, I learned you good. And then I feel good for a minute, I'm all superior and all of that. However, if the idea is to share and maybe open their mind a little bit to the direction of Christ, I know that's not going to work. Winning an argument is not like winning a heart, is it? If I'm going to win them, it's going to be in a way of gentleness, of respect. I hear where you're coming from. I love one of our young pastors, when somebody hits him with something really off the wall, he doesn't respond to it at all. At first, anyway, he starts with, why do you think that? Where did that come from? Because it's amazing why people say what they say. So if I'm doing it for their sake, if I'm using my apologia for their sake, I'm going to do it with gentleness and respect. If I'm doing it for my sake, I'm just going to beat them up, right? So, we have to look at why we're doing, and Scripture, of course, is doing it for their sake, not for our human fallen nature. Put it all together. It's not about having a snappy answer. It's not about being able to nail someone in an airplane and give them something in 2 minutes. The whole thing comes down to this, is that we are called to have reasons for our faith. And we are called to be able to articulate those reasons. And we are called to do that whenever the opportunity arises. And the questions may come at you sideways. It may not be a question at all. It might be an indictment. It might be something that seems hostile. We don't know, but are you ready? Are you ready? Do you hear the questions that are coming at us? Do we have a reasonable faith? Do you have a reasonable faith? And by that I mean we have reasons behind our faith. Is it deeply thought out? How is your logos? How firmed up is your apologia? Can you communicate it? Can you say what you need to say? Or are we Homer Simpson and we retreat into the bushes? Where are you in the reasonableness of your faith?